Hey, everybody, welcome once again to Inside the Matrix. I hope that all of you out there are doing well in spite of the bullshit happening in the world, and there's plenty of it. Anyway, my guest today is Frank Jacob. Frank is an amazing guy. He's a filmmaker, he's a researcher, he's a composer, he's a writer, he's a presenter himself, and somebody that's a thought leader in our community of enlightened beings, hopefully, in the world. And I first saw Frank on an Inspired interview and was very impressed with what he had to say. And he's got a lot to share with us today. So, Frank, welcome to Inside the Matrix.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Sure. All right. So anytime I have a new guest on the show, I always like to have them kind of give us a background of where you came from. So give us a feel for Frank Jacob.
Wow. Okay. Well, I just originally came to Earth, I think, as a curious soul. And because I, at a very early age, maybe at 12 or 13, I began questioning stuff. And I think for me, it was like a book that I ordered about Hiroshima and this atomic explosion where a certain group of people decided they were going to murder a few 100,000 Japanese people with the most gruesome, explosion. And I realized that I was on a planet of insane political leaders. And at that point, I think it deeply affected me. And I just began venturing into the cosmos and open for other alternatives. And I was sort of been attracted to older people, and that led me into the material that those older people, like my sister was older and her boyfriend was into sort of esoteric stuff like Carlos Castaneda books and Richard Bach and those kinds of things. Like, there's some amazing, like Illusions was one of those books. And I also came across something called Seth material by Jane Roberts very early on. But I was confronted with the idea of what to do with all this mind-blowing information. It helped me navigate the matrix very early, but the world is dominated largely by corporate interests and unconsciousness, and so for me the arts were the obvious choice of what direction to go in. So I decided not to go to university. I was attracted to filmmaking because I'd studied that in high school, and I did very well on that, actually. So I kind of always knew I wanted to get into it at some point, but I didn't really have the family situation or the geographic location to be able to go to, some film school in Hollywood or something and get networked with everybody and start making films. So I took the long way. I thought first I'd get rich being a rock star, and I went on tour and tried to compose music. Of course, it never works out the way you think it will. I ended up long road. I ended up connecting with sort of a famous and infamous music mogul called John Lamont, and he was hiding out in Sedona, Arizona, and he asked me to sort of take over his record business. And as I figured, it was kind of a backdoor way to kind of get into the business and then do my record. And as it always turns out, you get taken here and taken there. So it eventually, what it did do is it did lead me toward working with computers and working with editing workstations and understanding business and catalogs and promotion and all that. And long story short is then I got into the internet. That all happened, and I knew though that ultimately my love was still to be kind of a filmmaker or a multimedia artist, let's say, because those for me were the expressions that allowed you to get the message directly out there, to circumvent the filters, to circumvent, sort of boxed in thinking, so that's kind of always the direction I've been shooting for. It just took a long, long time. And I think the first sort of breakthrough film that I did was Packing for Mars. Although before that, I'd have to say I did, in the course of making Packing for Mars, meet some amazing people. One of them is Tonya Maidenford with Screen Addiction, and she actually helped me realize Packing for Mars to a level that I never would have been able to do on my own. And during the course of making Packing for Mars, which took 5 years, we actually did 2 other films. One of them was the Klaus Donner Chronicles. Not really a film cinematically in that sense, but a really great documentation of some of his out of place artifacts findings. Another amazing topic. And the other was a film called Solar Revolution, which we did with a German biophysicist, best-selling author, Dieter Breurs. And that film is really cutting edge because even though we did it and finished it 10 years ago, it's like so cutting edge even to this very moment. that what we talked about in that film is also what is described, by something that I was discovering recently, which brings me kind of to now. Like, that led me into a world of researchers, ufologists, just alternative thinkers. And I just always wanted to bring a production standard to that neighborhood, for lack of a better word for it, because I felt that a lot of what the material that was coming out in that area was always very low tech, YouTube, bad quality, gritty. And I had been working as an editor at the Red Bull Media House, and I'd kind of produced and edited and I had the chops. So it was easy to take the material I was interested in the ufology field, and make out of it something that looks, cinematically acceptable. Having been now in that circle, eventually I came in touch with, of course, a lot of amazing people like Bill Ryan, Carrie Cassidy, all the people that we had in our film, in our films, basically. And that continues to this very day. And so that's kind of the nutshell that got me to, like, now in 5 minutes, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you have a extremely diverse background, and I find that a lot of us, people that are in this field of trying to get information out to others, have those sorts of background. And of course, we have a lot in common, with music and our love of you're a filmmaker, and I'm an aspiring one. So these are the things that a lot of times bring us together in our common interests. But now, more recently, you came across something on YouTube, and I was checking it out as well, that sparked my interest. And back in, I think, 2012 or so, there was a lot of talk about Looking Glass, or even before that. But a lot of people said that in 2012 it stopped working, that nobody could see beyond 2012. And of course, I think a lot of us thought that something big was going to happen in 2012, on December 21st or whatever. And of course, it didn't. But Looking Glass kind of went away, for me at least. I didn't see a lot of people talking about it or hear anything about it. And then when I heard your interview, I realized that, hey, something new was happening with us. So tell us about your, when you came across that material on YouTube, and your thoughts about it, and, give us your view.
Well, for me, it was pretty much like with you as well. I'd come across the Project Looking Glass material 10 years ago, and, it was fascinating, but it had really gone silent. There was a video floating out there, which still is out there and getting a lot of views, by a guy called Bill Wood, or Brock Broder, or Brock Broder, as he's called.
Yep.
He's been defamed or dethroned since then, but still that material is circulating out there.
Yeah, he totally disappeared.
People won't let go, right? Yeah. And it was Carrie and Bill that kind of put that guy on the map, and for better or for worse. But he was describing, a situation of, at the end of 2012, it was over. There were all timelines were fusing, and there was a major event which was kind of waking up of consciousness, and that was going to kibosh the plans of the evil cabal. And I thought, okay, well, I mean, it sounds hopeful. We all want to believe that. Yeah. And, but, since that did come and go, what I've since 2012 realized is that 2012 was the beginning of something, a beginning of an influence from the cosmos on the human's consciousness, on the entire planet. But it isn't something which is like flipping a switch. It's something which is feeding us, and more of us are getting inspired or influenced by it. Now, the new Looking Glass data surprised me, just like you, because when I stumbled on it, first of all, it was in a place that I did not expect to see it. I think I was just on some Telegram channel, and I, by fluke, looked at some comments. Which I never do anyway, because you know what that's like. There's just too many, you can't keep up. But for some reason, as I was flipping down these comments, it said Looking Glass. And I'm like, what was that? What's that doing here? There's no reason that does have no place here whatsoever. So I clicked on it. And it brought me to this YouTube channel. There was like 80 views of 2 videos. And it was called Guardians of the Looking Glass. So I clicked on the videos and started watching them. And I was just floored, because the language that these so-called guardians that were military, ex-military, insiders that they were using was consistent. It was so synced up with so many other points that about Looking Glass, and B, kind of since Looking Glass, like now, talking about events that are now and current. And I realized, okay, what intrigued me about it was that they were bringing in details about the functionality of this device that nobody had really gone into. It was always just this Stargate, or, I mean, some people say it's from Sumeria, which is what the Guardians of Looking Glass said. It was an artifact that was brought to the Sumerians. It wasn't necessarily of the Sumerians, but leading to the idea that it was extraterrestrial technology, and that it ended up in Iraq, and that the Americans ended up taking over and getting that material, getting that information and that technology, and working with it. And the technology allowed them to, this device could be constructed and placed in a very unique place. It can't just be anywhere. It has to be in one of these places, which they're called like stargates, little mini vortex points on the planet. They're all over the place. There's really no number that anyone has ever said how many there are or aren't, but there are many of them. Some of them are on the surface, some of them are below the surface, some of them are up above the surface of the planet. And this device, when placed in proximity in one of these spots, begins to, through the use of some plasma coils that is part of the design, project holographically into the room. What the observers soon discovered was timelines in the future, like events taking place in the future.
So we're talking about
where they were at that moment.
A big display, in other words. So for people who don't know what Looking Glass is, I just kind of dawned on me. We should probably explain.
Right. That's what I think I'm trying to. Yeah. Exactly.
You're doing it. Thank you.
Because we can't assume everyone is just like us join the conversation. I mean, I know we've been at this conversation now for the last month. It's been intense, right? But for those who have just joined it, it's really like just think of it as a crystal ball in some kind of a technological form. And those who discovered it realized that they could watch the future, and eventually they figured out that the thing had it had loops, cycles. It played through a cycle of loops that would go up until the year 2030. And then it would stop and start all over again. And it would do this 144 times, meaning totaling 1,008 to 2.76 years for it to go through a complete cycle of 144 repetitions. And then it would start from another perspective. And they soon figured out, okay, well, let's, what are we going to do with this? So they cataloged it with the use of filming it and computers and using keywords. And eventually they could use those keywords to, from my understanding, bounce to specific events. And of course, the first thought is, hey, if we have this thing of looking into the future, what if we were to just go into this event and do something? We have it keyworded. We know what the result should be. So we also should see that the result should change if we affect it. Now, what's interesting about it is that the position that the video circulated with this guy, Bill Wood, was taking was that no matter, and the reason he claims to be called into this project was because the cabal, black hats or whatever you want to call them, that were working with manipulating the timelines had a problem. And that problem was that at some point, all the timelines seemed to converge into one, and there's nothing they could do to change that. And that whenever it did converge into one, there was this big awakening event, and that would be where humans kind of awakened and could see through. It's like they suddenly could see the truth. And so all the lies around them crumbled, and along with it, the cabal's evil schemes. The interesting thing is about the re-emerging data from the Guardians of the Looking Glass is that they have had completely the opposite position. They said that those who were working with the project found out that no matter what they did to intervene, the result always ended up in their favor anyway. Now, there's other aspects to the story of the Looking Glass, which maybe we can bring in a little bit, just peripherally, because it's a lot of material. But Dan Burish is one of the main players in it, and Dan Burish is somebody who was actually a biologist, and he was brought in to Area 51 to start working with an extraterrestrial which had been captured as part of a series of crashes that began taking place starting in the 40s. And they were called J-rods. And it turns out that the J-rods are not extraterrestrials, but actually future humans that have found a way to travel back in time using the looking glass, a form of it. I'm not sure it's the same one that they found in Sumeria, but it seems to me like there's several of these technologies and they're used by these future humans to get back to here. Why here? Well, because apparently right now, or in this time we're in right now, something takes place. And there's a split in the timelines to the point where it's a cataclysmic split leading to mankind going underground, surviving and re-emerging, and eventually, many thousands of years later, going out to the stars, to Orion and Reticulum, and seeding and, and actually mutating. They look like kind of like the Moloch, in the story of the time machine, right? They look deformed. They have these big buggy eyes, and it's because basically of what happened genetically to them over the course of tens of thousands of years. Now, it was the conversations that Brurish began having with this one J-rod that led them to understanding why and what these Stargate technologies, looking glass technologies, were used for. And so that's kind of my understanding of what led them to begin looking for them, finding them, and working with them. And so the position that these Guardians have taken is they were a faction within the team that didn't like the fact that those who are running it were using it nefariously, because apparently there isn't just one outcome. There's another timeline that began sprouting in the years 2012, the way they could see it, 2016 and 2022, where something happened, an anomaly took place that took the probability of the timeline that the Cabal wanted to have happen away from the odds and moved the odds in favor of another kind of a timeline. And that timeline is a very organic timeline that has something to do with a cosmic event that is going to be taking place at 2030, right? And that's why it's interesting, because all the looking glass data always stopped at 2030. And the Cabal thought, well, they've won anyway. And apparently there was an issue between 2007 and 2017 where these stargates that I was mentioning, these vortexes, they're not just natural, there's artificial ones. And the artificial ones are constructed ones by extraterrestrials to be able to get here. And they needed to be shut down, or we faced, probably the Earth maybe cracking and completely destroyed, So they apparently shut them down, but it looks like they were reopened. And the Guardians of the Looking Glass had the data and decided they were going to break out and share that information in some way with the public to warn us so that we can avert the timeline that's leading us down what I call the transhumanist timeline. I mean, a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion. Is it timeline 1? Is it timeline 2? Timeline version 183. I mean, to me, it's very simple. Like, okay, it might seem simplified, especially for those who are interested in timelines, that there would just be two timelines. Yeah, but you could look at it more like two timeline groups, and that have a certain consensus. There is a consensus that we all agree on. We all have our own timeline, but there are certain overlaps. And they categorize themselves into two general areas. One is the moving of society in the direction that's being pushed right now clearly, and it's easy to see. The World Economic Forum people, the Klaus Schwabs, the Yuval Hararis that are talking about artificial intelligence and data-driven, and that, there are no souls, that's all just mythology. We are the gods, the Satanists or whatever, the Luciferians, whatever you want to call them. And although I think those words are completely also misused or misunderstood, let's just say the people who are limited in their thinking and want to use technology because they believe the human brain is us and everything that is you takes place inside of your head. And there's a way then to actually read those signals and then download them onto a medium, an artificial medium, transplant them into some kind of a moving robot, and voila, you have the Humans television series. in its
You know,
ultimate
or
form, right?
upload series on Netflix.
Now there's a series
right?
called Upload, right? There's that, what was the other one called? Altered Carbon. Yeah, Altered Carbon. I mean, and so that's, I mean, we can see that that's kind of the timeline that's anchoring in. And a lot of us are kind of feeling we're just, most people out there are just being pulled along. They're on Netflix and Prime and they're watching all the series. This is all preemptive programming. This is all going on. And yet nobody's really talking about that amazing organic timeline that we as human beings have to make a quantum leap in our consciousness. And this has been what has been described by maybe the Maya and the Hopi, with this, the Hopi describe a point, like they have a diagram of a ladder or of a staircase that goes up. And then at one point, one goes down and one goes up. The Maya called something called the Hunab Ku, this ray from the center of the galaxy, and it was going to stimulate us. And, we explored that in our film Solar Revolution, this ray, and this is kind of what's, this is more the timeline that talks about really the fact that we're sentient beings, we're divine, we're actually, unconscious gods in the making, maybe with a small g, and that we have something before us, which is the fulfillment of something we haven't attained yet. And it has more to do with the idea that the entire cosmos is a living being, which, if any of you are familiar with Greg Braden, some of his later newest information is talking about that as well, that there is evidence now that the entire cosmos, the entire universe is a living being. And this flies completely in the face of the Yuval Harari version of events, who's the kind of the prophet god for the Klaus Schwab gang, that humans are it, that it's technology that's going to be the way through, the transhumanist idea that you implant, to keep up with machines, like Elon Musk has developed Neuralink, and that eventually that will probably expand to the point where we become more and more bionic and less analog biologic until we merge with machines.
The board will, yeah, they're talking about the board, right?
World, another show that has given us that picture, right? So what intrigued me about the Guardians of the Looking Glass is that they laid out the cold, hard, brutal events that are going to be coming our way. I mean, it's hard, dark stuff. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. Yeah,
and we've already seen plenty of it.
And it's already going on. Right? And one of the criticisms that I had in the very beginning from people that not most people were really positive. Okay, but those who do criticize it always tend to say, "Oh, you're going to manifest the dark stuff if you're talking about it." And I countered that by saying no, because when are you going to wake up and smell the coffee? Like, it's going on, people. I mean, if it's going to take this form or that form, it doesn't matter. It's right now we have a war going on in the Ukraine that doesn't need to happen. That war in the Ukraine, if we were smart to the people that are behind that war, the Kolomoiskys and Zelensky puppets and the Victoria Nulands who have been planning this stuff for years. If we were talking about that openly with hundreds of thousands of us, we would kibosh their stupid war. It wouldn't work because we'd say, no, it doesn't work. That guy isn't real. He's not a hero. He's a fucking he's a corrupt. I'll bleep that out. Hopefully,
that's okay. We don't censor anything here.
And so the events that they were describing, yes, they're dark, but they're telling us, wake up, people. And their only way that they found that they could change the events, because the other side, of course, is still in possession of the technology. They can see it coming. If an active attempt at assassination or something like that happens, they could take preemptive ways to avoid it. What they couldn't do, and which is what the final conclusion that these Guardians claim they realized, is that all they could do is they could open source it. They could dump it out into the public domain and hope that enough people begin talking about it so that when an event that they could see, they could see a whole series of events, apparently 70 of them coming at us between now and 2030, that if they put them out there in an open source kind of way, that if we actually catch on and start talking about them, the other side won't be able to go through with it, because it's like a surprise birthday party where the birthday kid, everyone tells him he's going to go home and everyone's waiting there for him. The party's on, right? The surprise is gone, so they had to change the plans. And the other thing they talked about this what happens at 2030 thing, which was this cosmic event. And that cosmic event is going back to what I was talking about earlier, this Hunab Ku, this ray. It's like this event comes and it kicks in like a wave. And if we are not affected by the plans of the timeline of the transhumanists, which includes vaccinations, which includes Trojan horse technologies, and I mean, they're talking openly about it, putting it into the system so that they're inside of your body now as well, communicating to the outside. And all of these other technologies that developing, the wars and the destruction and the defensiveness, that we're always in a state of fear and defensiveness, we won't be manifesting, we won't be focusing on that vision that we need of that future Earth 2 that we really do want to get onto. But they gave us that picture. They told us that it's an incredible new world that we're going to move into, and it'll happen. But the odds are right now really bad and are against us and it's not that far-fetched to say that, because it takes a lot of work to develop yourself physically, spiritually. As anybody that's ever been on the spiritual path and has started waking up realizes how difficult and how much work is involved. How much, pushback you get from the environment around you that you have to go through. So why would it be any different in a case like this? The odds are against us. Not that it's impossible, but, it takes a little effort and you have to begin to visualize that new world, and you have to recognize that old world, which is that timeline leading us down the garden path of technology to hell. And if we're not talking about that, we're not going to get very far. So that was my motivation to write an article about it, and just kind of put it out there in terms of consciousness, because I figured this is the direction we need to take the conversation. And I published it, and I didn't realize, I published it in a German portal, and somebody in the States caught it within hours, and that was John Newland with Inspired Channel. He's a German speaker as well. And he invited me for an interview, and we went on this interview, and I was like, I just figured like I've been making films and talking about fringe science for years, right? But it's like you get 80 people or 200 people, or maybe if you're lucky, 5,000 or 10,000 people will watch, But man, within 2 or 3 days, we had well over 100,000 people tuning into this conversation. Mm-hmm. And it just shocked everybody, including myself. And it's led now to this whole change. I think we've actually changed the universe. I'd have to say we've done it. Simply by talking about this stuff, good or bad, for good or bad, and even whether or not the Looking Glass Guardians are some marketing gag or a hoax or whatever, or controlled opposition, I don't think anyone could have expected us to hijack and hack that conversation and move it into the direction that it's going into right now.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a couple of things I wanted to speak to that you brought to mind. One is, what I call the love and light crowd, who goes, well, whatever you give your attention to, it gives it power. Well, that's bullshit, because what we need to do is recognize evil in the world and stand up to it. Because if we don't, it'll bowl us over. And it has. That's been proven over and over. That's what's happened to us, okay? Witness the last 2 years. And so our battle really is, having the ability to get what we're talking about right here out to as many people as possible, because it is the collective consciousness of human beings on this world that steer the events of the world. So this is why the cabal, I've said this a zillion times in this show, this is why the cabal spends so much time and energy trying to program our thinking, trying to get us to think along the terms that they want, so that we create what they want in their transhumanist bullshit world. But we need to begin thinking about what we want. We want a world of peace and love and cooperation and understanding and all of those great things that we all sort of aspire to and that we know are possible. But until we get enough of us who are aware of the situation and who are willing to recognize the situation as it is, it's going to be very difficult. But I know we're making a dent. So that's what inspires me. And when I see people like you, I'm so excited, because, we are making a dent in their game. Now, let's talk about the 18th, April 18th, because that was a date that the Guardians,
right.
gave us, as a possible event. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, the 18th was a date that they had projected as being something they seen in the Project Looking Glass timelines, where it was going to precipitate a series of events that were going to lead to a lot of destruction. The event itself was bad enough. It was supposedly going to be a detonated device in the middle of Times Square on a very busy day, on a very busy time on the 18th. And this would trigger, of course, a reaction. There would be the outcries right away that there needs to be justice. Just like with the World Trade Center, here we are as another, and many people have kind of decoded that whole thing as a false flag operation in itself as well. This was going to be no different. This is a false flag operation, which is going to lead to an accelerated conflict with Russia. Mm-hmm. And given that we're in a conflict, actually, you could say we are at war with Russia right this minute. It's happening. But this actually was going to trigger something that would lead to breaching that forbidden barrier of nuclear exchange. And these volleys would begin taking place, and they would get to the point where there was an anthrax attack, when people didn't completely buy the notion that it was Russia who had actually been behind the bombing in New York, because apparently the way Putin reacted was very reserved. He was telling us, hey, look, you've got this wrong, but stop. And so they did it a second time with this anthrax type, which was developed in Russian labs. And when that happened, everyone knew, or thought they knew, because again, it was a false flag, that it definitely was Russia. And that's what led to the serious volley between major weapons of destruction. And unfortunately, the Russians, unfortunately for the Americans, the Russians were able to shield themselves from the worst of it, but they didn't have as good of a result. The Russians actually were very highly effective in how they, hit us. And this led to essentially a total chaotic global meltdown of people in survival areas, mass starvation, total economic collapse, and in a way it reminds me of now that I've gone after this all started happening and we started talking about it, I began to, because it caught me off guard too, I gotta admit. I hadn't been into the material for many years, and I went back with Bill Ryan's help, who was on my case because I didn't get all the facts right and stuff. So I went back and started digging through the facts and of the original conversations with the J-Rods. And it's true that, it coincides with the idea that there was this, this dark event involving war that had taken place. So it was like, it seemed to me that the two types of J-Rods, which I didn't mention that there are actually two types, but there's a P45 kind, which are not wanting to change the timeline. They're probably Klaus Schwab's descendants. And then there's a P52 kind, which were the more spiritual kind. And they wanted to win-win, and they wanted to avert the timeline. And it seemed, when I read that, it just seemed to me, God, it's like uncanny. It's like exactly the same scenario. And they're still at it, even all these years later. They're still trying to push that timeline through. And so anyway, that was the event. And because, we began to talk about it, and this came out a week after the event, they released they've now released 4 videos. We haven't talked about event 2, but after event 1 took place, they released a 4th video in which for the first time, it was a reactive video. They had now seen the reaction out there.
Yeah, I saw that one.
And they said we had averted the event. Now, a lot of people that are skeptics are going to say, well, of course they're going to say that, right? Why not? If it's all not true, whatever. However, I can add this to it. When I first discovered the channel, there was like I said, very few people. I think now there was 80 then. Now there's over 180,000 on just the one video. But I went directly to my colleague and associate Dieter Breurs that we did the film Solar Revolution with, because a year to the day, we had done a show over Easter about timelines, and we included Project Looking Glass. And I said, hey, check this out. He didn't know this was coming. And so this started a conversation between us as well, where because our association, because he's a scientist, he's got taps into a lot of other areas that most normal people don't. One of them is a network of high-level remote viewers. And for those who don't know what remote viewing is, it's something that the Russians developed and the CIA later, which is certain people have the gift of being able to give them coordinates or just certain information, just locations or a couple of details, but nothing else, and they are able to actually project their remote view and see details that are really going on. And Ingo Swann was one of the most gifted one. But there's others, and if you do any research on it, but they can actually determine things that if they're real or not, or they can see beyond concrete walls or into the earth or even on other planets, as it's now turned out. But we tried to get some, Dieter immediately went to the remote viewers he knew and tried to get them interested. And at first they were resistant because they thought it was some kind of a gag. But eventually, I think one of them kind of had a hit that, no, maybe this is something we do need to look at, because it is a pretty intense, it is the point of the beginning of a very, very intense new time, like solidifying of a particular timeline that's already around us now, but even much more so. So they began remote viewing it, and lo and behold, they all, without doubt, realized that there is something to this. Now, the interesting thing is that they didn't see it exactly happening on the 18th. They saw it happening even in one case beforehand, maybe a week before, and certainly within a window of time. And according to what the message now was that we got back to that, what the Guardians released after the 18th in their fourth video, is they said that because we had actually started this dialogue and got it out there, they had to change their plans, and they began to mess with another project which is tied to Looking Glass, and that is CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. And they began tinkering with that in order to affect the Looking Glass timelines. And as a result, it led to a botched attempt to set it in motion a week earlier. And what happened a week earlier was something really bizarre. In New York, there was an event that took place where there was a bombing, smoke bombs, and some shooting taking place in the subway, and a kind of a mild terrorist attack that never went anywhere. And it was quickly dropped again by the media, interestingly. But they relate that directly to the tinkering of the cabal with the technology that they're working with in CERN. Yeah. So do you want me to go on a bit about CERN, or do you want to jump in here with something?
Let me just jump in there. Yeah, they didn't get any traction on that subway thing because, if it would have been a white guy or somebody they could have called a white supremacist that did it, then they would have ran with it. But it wasn't. So it didn't do them much good to go with that.
Us
and of
evil
course,
white people are definitely always going to get much more press.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, as you mentioned, these false flags, people need to wake up that these are manufactured events. Problem, reaction, solution, the Hegelian dialectic, it's so old. It's how you control people. You create the problem, you have the reaction that you want, and then you offer the solution that you wanted to implement in the first place. And we see it happening over and over and over again. So apparently we were able to avert the April 18th event, or whatever that time frame was. It could have been a little earlier. And like you said, and that other event happened. But I think CERN is probably playing into this too, because, they don't build things like this for nothing. Obviously it spent billions of dollars building this. I think it's 18 miles in circumference or something?
27 kilometers. Yeah. So
it's a ridiculous,
right.
Huge size that, they're blasting these particles around this thing and altering timelines or attempting to anyway. So in case you don't know about that, people look up CERN, CERN. It's on the border of Switzerland and where is it?
It's in Geneva.
Geneva, yeah. So, that's something that to be considered too. But again, the more people that we can get to become aware of all of these types of events, because everything is a fear inducing event that they're trying to do. So
Yes.
as long as people are in a state of fear, they are totally manipulable, if that's a word, or able to be manipulated and propagandized by what they're doing. But the solution is so simple. Once we have an awareness, and I don't think it takes the majority of people, but once there's enough of us that have the awareness of what's going on in our world and what the manipulations are, they no longer have any power over us, because if we stop cooperating, that's the key. It's so simple. Just don't cooperate. If they have mandates, we don't do them. There's nothing they can do at that point. But until we reach that awareness, we're still in this battle, like you said, and we still have to be diligent. And all of us have to, if you don't have a YouTube channel or any kind of, social media channel, start one. Share information. Talk to people who are willing to listen. Now, it's a waste of time to talk to people who are, set in their mind that this is the way it is and there's no other possibility. Don't waste your time with those folks. But if somebody asks you questions about things that you know about, share the information. And we are the ones that are going to have to wake up the world if we can do it. And we're all attempting to do it. So I always go on my rants, but I'll come back to you, Frank. Go ahead and continue.
Well, I mean, I wanted to just briefly touch on CERN because a lot of people know very little about this facility, and I actually wanted to give you some facts so you can get kind of an idea what we're looking at here. Okay, what just happened, and the Looking Glass Guardians having brought CERN into the equation, I thought was very unusual because, even if you look at it, if like a lot of the people that are saying it's false information or it's controlled opposition or it's a fraud or a gag or it's whatever, it doesn't matter, because what they've done is they've introduced these subjects into the public discourse. And what happened on and just a couple of weeks ago is that CERN, which has been used as the official explanation is to create a giant magnetic runway in which they then smash particles together to try and figure out, the origins of the universe and, all the particles involved. And, they are using this technology for these purposes. But what another technology they're using it for is time travel, to open portals, believe it or not. It actually they were doing this years ago already. Like, I think at least 10 years, if not more, 12 years, they were working with mini time loops that they were actually able to open. And, there's information about that. I think I talk about it on the Inspired interviews. I show even a couple of the diagrams that talk about it. But what people don't realize is that a couple of years ago, they shut it down and they revamped it and they refurbished it. And in the past, they were doing experiments they're working on something in the level of tera electron volts. Yeah. And they needed to generate, a few million tera, like 6.8 tera electrovolts to be able to explore the idea of black holes. But it wasn't enough, for what they wanted. So what they've done now is that, 1 tera electrovolt is equivalent to 1 trillion electron volts, okay? And they've now refurbished this thing to generate 12 tera electrovolts, 12 trillion electron volts, okay? And they've started it on the 22nd, just a few short days ago, and they're ramping it up every day. And they're building and building and building up to when they have the 12. And the planet, we have never in our entire history have had an artificial electric field of this magnitude generated. And the first time they were doing it, back when they were still back on 3 and 4 tera electron volts, they were already changing the time and the locality. They were affecting clocks and things in Switzerland. It's all on the record. There is even pictures where you could see dimensional bleed-throughs in the facilities of, it's a giant loop, and it extends, it's 100 meters in the ground, and it extends around through, actually across border even. It's so huge.
It's kind of like a large donut, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
like
it?
a large donut,
Like
exactly.
a tube, like
Right.
this giant tube that's underground. It's like a large donut, so you can visualize it that way.
Right. Exactly. So here they are. I mean, and the people that are working on these projects are not public domain. The ones that are they're using for time and for even Geordie Rose, who's the one of the inventors of the D-Wave quantum computer, talked 12 years ago already, about them using the D-Wave quantum computer to crack through to parallel dimensions. Imagine that one. Get that through your head, right? Parallel dimensions, and making contact and solving problems between dimensions. They were doing this like 10 years ago. And they've hooked these quantum computers up at CERN, and they are opening portals into, you can be sure of this, absolutely. This is what they're doing right now, and they're doing it with unprecedented power. It's getting very, very dangerous. And I don't want to put fear into you out there and everything. I just want you to be aware that this is really, so this has a, like, if people think the Guardians of the Looking Glass are a fraud, well, I mean, if they were, or if they were the other side leaking information out, like there's this rule, they have to tell us what they're doing, or they won't be able to get away with it, then they've made a big mistake, because there's never been this much focus on CERN as we've now initiated through our conversation of hundreds of thousands of people all of a sudden that have never, and this information about where they're going with CERN, nobody knows about this. What I'm telling you right now, very, very few people have ever heard this before. They don't know this is going on. The one scientist, Hans-Peter Wirtz, who was a colleague of Dieter Broers, came out a couple of years ago in 2019, and he was involved in the early projects. And he described how when they broke through the first time, it's the classic scene. The doors open, limos pull up, the MIB show up, and the project is taken over. Very similar to what happened with the Chronovisor, which I mentioned also in that other conversation about the technology they were using, built by the Vatican and Pellegrino Ernetti, to see into different times as well. And that also was taken over and ended up underground and connecting it with DARPA. But it's not related to the Looking Glass technology. But the Looking Glass and what they're doing now with this technology by connecting it is only, they're trying to, we've now, with our blocking of Event 1, we've changed the odds. We've now weakened their timeline. And they're really pissed. Apparently, they are super pissed. And they want to, and I'm sure they're scaling up their game. So part of that is to mess with what's going on at CERN. So it's real. So regardless of what you think of the Guardians of the Looking Glass, they're talking about real things. These are real technologies, and they're being used, just not by you and I. But what we have, and that we never can forget, is that we are like quantum computers in ourselves. And even though they have to place these things in artificial stargates, the fact is, ultimately, we are all stargates ourselves. We are the stargate. We have direct connection to the other dimension. People talk about that. The fifth, we're all going to come into the fifth dimension. Let's just meditate and stuff. It sounds great. But most people don't understand really what that means. There's so many, ask anyone in the New Age what is fifth dimension. You'll get a new definition with every person. But the fifth dimension can be looked at as frequency. There's also a scientific basis for it. And there's a physicist who's very, very incredible, a German physicist called Burkhard Heim, who lived in the 40s, 50s, came out to be, and he died in 2001. But he developed a 12-dimensional model of the universe. And he explains very clearly what those dimensions signify, what is stored in all these dimensions. And the fifth dimension is very interesting because it's one of those dimensions which is kind of like a repository of agreed to information. When we experience stuff, we put it in there and it gets stored there. And when we need to draw on inspiration, we can, some of us just, I'm sure it's happened to you. You sit down as a musician or something and you're looking, and all of a sudden this chord progression comes, or this beat comes through, these lyrics, or if you're a writer, all of a sudden the text comes. It's coming from that other dimension, just beyond the fourth dimension, which is really literally just time, to give us in the 3D an ability to experience things. So the tapping in of the fifth dimension is actually stimulated by our pineal gland. And the pineal gland is being stimulated by what's coming at us from the center of the galaxy right now, which is going back to what I said at the very beginning, that this Hunab Ku, this event, Paul Laviolette talks about it in terms of a wave. There's other descriptions of it. You know, Charles Hapgood, another person that's a character in this field, talks about, I mean, he's got a model of Earth cataclysm, which is pole shift and magnetic and physical pole shift. And you know, he published material in the 60s, which later, then he published a new, like, revised version, which had Einstein as a foreword, but it was completely debunked because he was a CIA member, and he published that because the material he developed about the cataclysmic and pole shift events that are before us was taken, you know, off the books and went to classified. But that's re-emerging now. And so we're facing, you know, something coming at us. It's either going to be some kind of a wave, like Paul Laviolette talks about, or we talked about in Solar Revolution with this, you know, what the Mayas called the Hunab, which is this place we're in on the galactic plane in the Earth's rotation through the cosmos. It's at a place now where we're actually directly in line with radiation and waves and frequencies, which we've never, if ever, probably had. And those are affecting our pineal gland. And our pineal gland is that bridge into the fifth dimension, into that other dimension, through something also called the Schumann resonances. And so, you know, these are all pretty intense topics. I'm sort of giving you a real nutshell of this information right now. Each of these topics is worth a film or a long show all on its own.
Oh, I know.
But these events are all, what I'm trying to get here is that the technology is in us as well. And we don't need to have it artificially put into our brains, you know. It's great that Elon Musk developed Neuralink, and probably the reason, you know, one of the reasons he purchased Twitter has less to do with being the voice for democracy and maybe a little bit more to do with the amazing data mining he's just opened himself up to in his new project Neuralink.
Not to mention
they're trying to create that repository artificially.
Yeah, not to mention the blackmail possibilities that he can have, knowing the private conversations of all these Twitter users and things, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, yeah, that's a huge reservoir of information there, and it remains to be seen how that's going to turn out. But when you know about Elon Musk's family and his background as an actor, much like Zelensky, right? Actors who become all these, you know, elevated figures. Gee, go figure. How does that happen? Well, nothing like that happens without the blessing of the powers that be. So, you know, just a word to the wise, these people that rise up meteorically and become billionaires, you know, and there's a whole slew of them. We all know who they are. It's no accident. You know, this is not something that happens organically or naturally. It just, you know, these people are put in place for a reason. So just keep that in mind. When you speak about the dimensions or whatever, I kind of look at it as frequencies of existence or frequencies of concentrated awareness. So, you know, right now we're mired in this 3D materialistic world, but those of us who have ventured out beyond that, you know, through meditation into other how should I put it, ways, other frequencies of being, you realize that there are other ones, there are other places to go to, and there are other realities that, you know, exist simultaneously with us. And so that's the way I look at it. I just see it as another plane of awareness that we will have access to more and more. And the human being is the ultimate technology, and I think that's why they're trying so desperately to tear us down, because we are transceivers. You know, we're constantly, you know, receiving information, like you said, from all these different sources, and we're transmitting information. So the information we transmit is super important because that is going into the collective consciousness. So are we programming our demise? Are we programming our you know, a freedom, you know, to occur? That's the question. So, you know, we keep at it and we keep speaking about it because we want to empower all human beings out there, you know, to create the world that we want, not the Klaus Schwabs of the world. You know, how can anybody look at that frickin' toad and his minions and think this is anything good whatsoever. And the problem is, they are, directly connected with the bankers who create money out of thin air. So they're able to buy, people who have no moral standards whatsoever, no conscious ideas about right and wrong. These people are bought and paid for, so they are useful minions to this, process that they're under. But those of us who can see this, we've got to stand up, people. We're going to be the ones to liberate ourselves. Nobody else is going to save us. There's not going to be a galactic God come down or a race of beings that are going to come in and save our world. It's up to us. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Well, there can't be. I mean, it's like that would be, you can't have free will, Jimmy, right? On the one hand, and say, on the other hand, that the Savior is going to come and fix everything. It is going to be up to us completely, to make that shift and to come together. And I think we're starting it. I wanted to read something to you if you're interested that just somebody sent me yesterday.
Yeah, please do. I'd love to hear it.
There's this group of Polish mediums, and they publish material once a month. And they just sent out their latest thing. I'll just read you these last couple of these two paragraphs that I pulled out, which I thought are kind of cool. I translated them. This period is rich with intense influxes of light waves. We were able to experience day after day, from the 17th to the 20th, up to 4 solar flares, including 2 of the strongest X-class and in between 2 M-class, which brought a strong influx of light. For some people, the process of activating the 5th DNA strand has just begun. The consciousness of humanity has made a leap to a higher level. This means that the energy generated by one group of people who are aware of themselves as creator beings is already stronger now than the chaotic energy of destructive creation generated by beings who still live in fear and are not in control of their own power of creation. A group of people aware of the power of their own creative abilities has the full potential to create a scenario of positive events now at this very moment, and is indeed already doing so. So
wow. Oh, I love that.
Hot off the press, man. Is that intense or what?
Oh, that's awesome. And it fits right into what we're talking about and what's happening in the world.
Dieter and I just recorded a program. We're doing something about ITK, like transcommunication, interdimensional transcommunication. And the messages that he has in his archive, some of them come back from the 90s, going back 30 years almost. And they're saying the same thing, right? And if you look at this doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox, which is something that emerged out of the discussions with the J-Rods and Dan Burish, they talk about it as well. It's the same language, and it's like it's coming at us from everywhere. And I think the signs are there that we're going to make that shift. But we do, like it says, we do have to work at it. We can't just sit back and eat the popcorn and watch the show. We have to take responsibility because we have free will, and that's the price for free will. Because look, Klaus Schwab, they know this, man. They're doing it. They're actively meeting. They have amazing presentations. They have the best tech. They have money. They influence the media. They have the NGOs in their pocket. They're funding the groups that our governments are going to make policy decisions. I mean, they're deeply in it, man. Don't confuse yourself, people. If you think that the deep state is dead and gone, or that the reptilians have left the planet, I'm sorry. I don't see. I still see far too many Ukrainian children dying needlessly for me to justify that argument. I think we need to keep fighting. And if they have left the planet, great. But apparently there's a lot of cleanup to do. And, if we don't get to the business of cleaning up, maybe it's going to swing back in the other direction, because the odds are not in our favor. The odds are in their favor. And we just need to wake up to it. And it's very easy. We're doing it already. It's not that high tech. It's what we human beings do really well. We communicate, we talk. And out of that, emerge amazing, miraculous things, technologies and inventions they've already invented things in the 50s that are, free energy devices. They invented things in the 80s in Germany, like they invented a diesel engine that ran 4,000 kilometers on one tank of gas. And they had production ready to go the next year. We never saw that production kick into place. Why? Because that some NGO influencing some government official who was in charge of that department said, no, you can't do that. We have this agenda, right? But now that we know these things, and now that we're talking about these things, we're going to call them out. And this is kind of another things that the Polish people were talking about. We're going to begin to call them out now. We're in the next coming couple of years, right up to 24, it's going to start ramping up. We're going to start calling them out on their BS. And I think that's the key to changing it. And that's all it really takes. We don't need a lot of technology because there's more of us than there is of them. Eventually, they're going to go running.
Yep. And I think the next event that they were talking about, I believe, was May 20th. So
yes.
I want people talking about, all of you out there, let's talk about May 20th and that these people are planning something insidious and that, we need to definitely get the word out so that they can't do it. And they have to constantly be reacting to us and changing their plans and everything. We're the one that's asymmetrically going to screw up everything that they want to do to us. If we only will grab that power and use it. We have the ability, like you said, as human beings. We don't even need all the tools that they have. They have no restriction on what they can do to control us. They will kill, they will lie, they will cheat, they will steal. They will do all of these things with no conscience and no reservation. We don't need any of that. All we need is our consciousness, our love for one another, and our thoughts, our communication with each other, our cooperation, all of those things that we have that we can do are so much more powerful. They can't even begin to stand up to it if we just take it and run with it. So that's the whole idea. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, Frank, because you're a musician too, and that's the effect of music and how we can use music. Because I think sound frequency in general and music is going to be super important as well moving forward, because music being a universal language, it has a profound effect on people. And so I think those of us who are into that need to begin to utilize that more as well. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. That's cool. I mean, I totally agree. Being a musician, it's always been a very, very important thing in my life. And the way I often use music now is if I want to exercise or do something or go for a walk, I sometimes will put on a particular piece of music. And I just find that you can use music because it's frequency to amplify your emotions. And when you feel joy and love and euphoria, not in a, perverted sense, but in a very excited sense that you see, when you begin to visualize things, when you're listening to music, you actually, I think, you amplify its effect by a magnitude of several levels, as opposed to when you just sit by yourself and try to visualize. And, it has to be, of course, some music which works, and it's different for everybody. It's hard to put it in a can and say this music is good for everything. I know the kind of music that works for me. But it absolutely, I think it's been critical in my own life when, even just simply as an editor, as you know, I'm a professional film editor, and often I won't even really start working on a piece until I've gone and found the right piece of music. I put that music in the timeline, and then I see the pictures. It just comes to me, and I look for the, people will sometimes give me just the text and say, okay, can you just make something out of it? And I'm like, it might be something, totally not spiritual, but it doesn't matter. It's still someone's idea, and it's valuable to them. So I tune into that. I tune into what it means to them, and I tune into the emotional experience. I find the piece of music, and I see the pictures, and then I just find them. And I think music can work this way for people who are waking up to this information. They can listen to music, and they can take a step back from our interview or whatever they were listening to, which just gave them maybe an overload. Yeah. And put on music and they go out walking in the desert or in the forest or on the beach or whatever, and they just reflect on it and put them and start hearing and seeing things, it'll help assimilate the information way better than if they didn't have the music.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Music is very powerful, and as you said, it invokes imagery in the mind. So, that I know that's what it does for me. I can go on a journey with a really great piece of music and meditation or whatever. I can literally travel, go on a long journey with it. So it's a great thing, and it's something that we need to utilize. So anyway, I've kept you long enough today, Frank. Keep up the good work. I so appreciate you sharing with us today. Awesome information, and hopefully we'll be able to check back with you. And maybe in a month or two, and let's talk about the events and whether
Yes.
they've occurred or not occurred, and kind of maybe keep a little scorecard on where we are in the timeline and how we're doing. How us humans are doing against the evil ones out there. And but I ultimately, it's the play that we agreed to be involved with here. We came into this world. I think a lot of us realize that we came in for a reason. We didn't just come in here to play around. We have a sort of a mission to accomplish, and I think we're doing it now. So with that, I thank you, Frank. I will put links in the description for everybody to check out Frank's work, and also the Guardians of the Looking Glass, their YouTube channel, so everybody can check that out as well. So until next time, everybody, we'll see you inside the Matrix.